Welcome to Subclass Series, a playlist of videos where I plan to break down each and every subclass one by one down to the fundamentals, going over all of the verbs, buffs, synergies, as well as some niche features for each subclass that you might not even know about. And I pose this question to you: how well do you really know each subclass? This video is mainly targeted at beginners and intermediate players, as well as new players who want to finally understand subclasses so that you can come up with your own builds without having to wait for content creators. Or maybe you want to find a way to take your team's DPS from a 3-phase to a 2-phase. Whatever the case, I'm hoping through this series I can teach you something, even if the takeaway is that you already know everything. And with that said, please correct me in the comments. I'm human, I make mistakes, but if I have, I want to be corrected. I could have missed something, tested something wrong, or I might have simply just misunderstood a mechanic. Please keep me accountable and let me know. I read every single one of the comments on my videos, good or bad. Now let's get into it. It's Void today, if that wasn't abundantly clear by the thumbnail, and it's the last of the light subclasses for me to cover in this series. Void is easily the most annoying subclass to deal with inside of PvP, thanks to Invisibility and Overshields having way too much uptime in Crucible. And even inside of PvE, Void has some amazing uses, especially in endgame content. Even day 1 raids and dungeons will always have someone utilizing at least one of the Void verbs without fail. That's how good it is. And I think that's insane, given that Invis Hunter is well and truly IP defining at this point. But it's a crazy thing to think that Void Hunters didn't even exist when Destiny 1 first released. But I've got to say that Bungie has done really well to lift Void up to its current glory. Now, with how versatile it is, Void has the downside of being the most info-dense subclass with more verbs than any of the other options in the game. So I do apologize ahead of time, but this is a long one. We've got 3 buffs and 3 debuffs, along with an elemental pickup just like the rest. In order, we have Invisibility, Overshield, and Devour for the buffs, then Volatile, Weaken, and Suppression for debuffs, with Void Breaches as the elemental pickup. And before I dive into the verbs in detail, I want to see how much you know about Void, so my trivia question for this video is: how many different ways can you apply Void Suppress across all 3 classes? Now let's get started on the buffs. As I mentioned, there are 3 Void buffs in Destiny, and they're all really strong. And I'm gonna start with Devour, because this has been a powerhouse of a verb for ages, even before verbs were actually a thing. Devour has been nerfed a couple of times since the launch of Destiny 2 because of how strong the instant healing was. Originally, it was exclusive to Warlocks and it would always fully heal you. Nowadays, because of how easy Devour is to get, it will heal 70 HP at base whenever you get a kill. And you'll also get a little bit of grenade energy as well, depending on the tier of the enemy that you kill. Red bars give about 7%, while mini-bosses and elites will give you up to 20%. This makes it fantastic for grenade-based builds like Nothing Manacles or Axiom Bolts. However, if you run the Devour-focused aspect on Warlock called Feed the Void, then you double the effects of Devour across the board, double the health and double the grenade energy. And the greatest thing about Devour is that any kills while the buff is still active will extend the timer by at least 5 seconds, making it extremely easy to use. But the biggest question at this point is: how do you get Devour? Unless you're on a Warlock, there's only one way to get it through the Void subclass, and that's by running the fragment Echo of Starvation. By picking up an Orb of Power or a Void Breach, it grants Devour. But with how easy it is to generate Orbs of Power in Destiny, gaining Devour this way is really simple. And one of the best fragments to pair with Devour just in general, or any Void buff for that matter, is Echo of Persistence. I'll be mentioning this constantly, but this fragment basically adds an extra 50% to the duration of your buff, meaning Devour will just last for longer. If you want to gain Devour through exotic weapons or armor, then your options are pretty limited. Titans can run Mask of the Quiet One, which will grant Devour through rapid kills, or kills while at low health. Warlocks can run Secant Filaments, which grants Devour whenever you step into your own Empowering Rift, and a neat little piece of knowledge is Devour gained through this exotic will have the longest buff timer in the whole game, going up to 22 seconds with the right setup. Now, there's only one exotic weapon in the whole game that can give Devour, and that's Buried Bloodline. It requires 4 kills or 1 elite kill to trigger the buff, whichever happens first, and I didn't realize, but these don't have to be rapid kills either. There's no timer on this exotic perk, so you can slowly build to Devour and save the activation for when you want it. But Devour only makes up 1/3 of the buffs for Void. The other healing focused buff is Overshields. The best way to think about Overshields is that they give you a little bit of extra HP. And when you've got a full Overshield, it's about 45 extra health, which doesn't really seem like a lot, but that's only because you don't know about the really useful properties of Overshields. The first is that while you have a Void Overshield, you have a 70% damage resist against all PvE enemies. And that applies to any damage that would destroy your Overshield and deal actual damage at the same time. So even if you only have 1 HP of an Overshield, you're getting a 70% damage resist. The second really useful property is that if you take damage while you have an Overshield, it doesn't stop health regen, which can let you heal back to full even if you're taking constant tick damage from something, so long as the damage doesn't destroy your Overshield, you'll just heal. A great example of this is the Proximity Ward finisher or Ward of Dawn. Unless you crack that Overshield, they will eventually heal all the way back up to full HP. Now combine this with a Healing Rift and you become very difficult to kill. Now Overshields are almost more difficult to get than Devour, making them basically the exclusive property of Titans. The seasonal artifact sometimes gives ways for each class to gain an Overshield, but I'm not going to cover that in this video because they change constantly every season. The only fragment that gives a Void Overshield to every class is Echo of Vigilance, which gives you an Overshield if you get a kill while at red health, so it's a bit difficult to work with. Echo of Persistence will once again increase the duration of this buff by 50%, which works really well with Overshields, but it's only useful if you have the Overshield to begin with. Now if you're a Titan, then you're sitting pretty. You can almost spend your entire life with an Overshield. Both melees grant an Overshield, Sentinel Shield and Ward of Dawn give Overshields to you and your team, running the aspect Bastion makes all your barricades provide an Overshield, and finally, blocking damage with Unbreakable slowly generates a Void Overshield. So Titans pretty much have a monopoly on Overshields, but that's only if you rely on the Void subclass completely. If you bring legendary weapons into the mix, one of the easiest ways to gain an Overshield is via Repulsor Brace. This is a weapon perk on a ton of legendary Void weapons that gives a full 45 HP Void Overshield whenever you defeat a Void debuffed target, making this easily the best way to gain an Overshield on Hunter and Warlocks. Now if we take a look at the exotics available, Warlocks, you're screwed. There is no exotic armor that lets you get an Overshield. Hunters can use their latest exotic, Fortune's Favor, which will slowly grant an Overshield while you're not in combat. Graviton Forfeit received a rework that gives a Void Overshield every time you go invisible with 3 stacks of the exotic perk. That's really, really good. There's also Gerfalcons, but it has a few hoops to jump through before you actually get that Void Overshield, and Mothkeeper's Wraps can give a Void Overshield thanks to the Void Moth. However, and this is a big however, the exotic will always favor creating damaging moths, so the arc blinding moths, instead of the Void Overshield moth. So if there are too many enemies around, it won't generate the Void Moth. Titans surprisingly only have one exotic that gives Void Overshields, and that's No Backup Plans, which needs a handful of shotgun kills before it grants the buff. It's worth noting that One-Eyed Mask, Eternal Warrior, and Precious Scars, along with Star Eaters, all say they give an Overshield, but it's not a Void Overshield, so there's no subclass synergy. There are also a few exotic weapons that can give a Void Overshield. Edge of Action is the Witch Queen DLC Glaive that spawns a mini Ward of Dawn, giving a Void Overshield whenever you're inside the bubble. Vexcalibur generates a Void Overshield whenever you perform a Glaive block. And Manticore gives a Void Overshield if you get a kill while airborne. Exdirus can spawn moths on multi-kills, and the purple ones can give you an Overshield, but only if you're running Mothkeeper Wraps on Hunter. And that's basically everything you need to know about Void Overshields. And the last buff that I want to talk about is Invisibility, and every PvP player will be overly familiar with this one. Invis makes you completely untargetable inside of PvE, allowing you to run past enemies and complete objectives in relative safety. But while Invis, there's really not a whole lot that you can do without breaking your invisibility. Any kind of attack usually ends it, and most abilities will also break invisibility. Even most charging attacks like fusion rifles and charged abilities will break invisibility. Bows are the exception, and there are a couple of other cases where it doesn't break invis. But a neat little trick is that charging attacks will only break invis if they're started after going invis. Sometimes it's possible to start charging an attack before going invisible, which then lets you use these attacks while remaining safe. Now, the Void subclass does have one fragment which provides invis to all classes, just like the other two Void buffs. Echo of Obscurity, performing a finisher, will grant invisibility, and this is way easier to do than getting the Void Overshield. Super simple and fantastic for special finishes. Echo of Persistence will pair with this to increase the duration by 40%, because it has to be different. But other than this fragment, only hunter abilities and aspects provide invis, since the buff is dominated by hunters. In fact, every one of the hunter aspects gives invisibility in some way. On the Prowl creates a cloud of smoke when defeating a marked target. Stylish Executioner grants invis whenever defeating a void debuffed target, while Trapper's Ambush and Vanishing Step let the melee and class abilities grant invis. Now, the only exotic armor piece that grants invis is Assassin's Cowl, where any melee kill or finisher will give you invis. I'm honestly surprised that there isn't more either for Hunter or the other two classes. There are no other exotic armors that directly give you invis, and there's only 3 exotic weapons that do. Rat King will make you invis whenever you reload after a kill, Heart Shadow will make you invis on a heavy attack, and Third Iteration makes you invisible if you get a precision kill or a kill on a marked target. So it's difficult to build into invis on any other class other than Hunter, and for the sake of Crucible, that's probably a really good thing. Now that covers all of the Void buffs, and there was a lot to say about them, but honestly, I think the most fun with Void comes from using the debuffs. So starting with Volatile, when an enemy is debuffed with Volatile, they are essentially marked for 10 seconds. In that time, you have to deal a certain amount of damage to that enemy to trigger a Void Explosion, dealing damage to the debuff target and to anything nearby. But once you trigger the Void Explosion, the debuff disappears and you will need to reapply Volatile to start the process again. Very similar to Scorch and Ignitions. Now there's a couple of ways to apply Volatile in the Void subclass. First, looking at the fragments, we have Echo of Cessation, which applies Volatile to nearby enemies whenever you do a finisher, or you have Echo of Instability, which gives Volatile rounds to Void weapons. Now I hadn't mentioned it yet, but Volatile rounds is a bit of an outlier for the subclass. Because when you have Volatile rounds, any damage from your Void weapons will apply the Volatile debuff. And as an added extra bonus, while the perk is active, all your Void weapons become anti-barrier. But this often confuses people into thinking that Volatile is anti-barrier. And honestly, I've been misunderstanding this fact since Volatile was released. It's actually the Volatile rounds that provide anti-barrier, not Volatile. Now, other than via these two fragments, there are some aspects and abilities that let you apply Volatile. You can do it by landing direct hits with the Hunter's Super Mobius Quiver. You have the Controlled Demolitionist aspect on Titan, which causes any ability damage to apply Volatile, including barricade damage. And for Warlocks, we have the Melee, Nova Warp, and the handheld Supernova via Chaos Accelerant. They all apply Volatile. Volatile can also be applied via legendary weapons if they roll with destabilizing rounds. This perk is actually pretty crazy right now because getting a kill creates a volatile spreading explosion and it gives volatile rounds for 3 seconds. So any legendary void weapon can become temporarily anti-barrier thanks to this perk, or just a volatile spreading machine. Now if we take a look at the available exotics for Volatile, we have Astrocyte Verse on Warlocks, which is the Blink helmet, and it allows Blink to apply Volatile whenever you activate your jump ability near enemies. Or for Hunters, we have Gerfalcons, which gives Volatile rounds whenever you come out of invisibility. But that's just the armor. Going down the list of exotic weapons, we have a ton. We have the King of Void debuffs Collective Obligation, which can apply all 3 debuffs through its exotic perk. And you're gonna hear me repeating this for every single one. Deterministic Chaos applies Volatile every 4 shots. Fighting Lion, when you land a direct hit, will apply Volatile. And I don't know when it happened, but Leviathan's Breath applies Volatile now as well. I don't know when that happened. And a bit of an odd one is Edge of Action. Whenever you get a projectile kill, it gives you Volatile rounds, which essentially is Volatile. So there are a couple of solid options for Volatile, but what about the other 2 debuffs? Weaken is easily the most used debuff in endgame content, in raids, dungeons, GMs, conquest, day 1 content, anything. Anything that needs more DPS, Weaken will always be used. Now this debuff is about making enemies take more damage, and except for a couple of cases, it's always a 15% damage increase, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it really makes a difference in raids and dungeons. And it's super easy to know if an enemy is weakened, because they'll just be glowing purple when they're affected by the debuff. But an even bigger sign that an enemy is weakened is all your attacks will start doing gold numbers like you're hitting headshots. But this is actually where Weaken has caused quite a bit of confusion for some people, especially if you don't know what's happening. When you apply Weaken, it doesn't change the crit spot, and you can test this yourself by taking a gun that has triple tap. If these attacks were headshots, I would be getting free ammo, but I don't. Even though I'm getting gold numbers just like a headshot, triple tap isn't working because these are not headshots. Gold numbers only indicate that I'm dealing more damage than normal. That's all. So keep that in mind if you're using this during DPS and don't get tricked. You still need to aim for headshots. Now how can we apply Weaken with the Void subclass? There's only one fragment that applies Weaken, and that's Echo of Undermining. This allows any of your Void grenades to apply Weaken on hit, and for grenades like Vortex and Spike, this can be really, really strong, since they last longer than other grenades like Axion darts. But this fragment does penalize you with a -10 to your grenade stat. This used to be -20, but Bungie thought this was a bit too punishing in the modern sandbox. As for which abilities can weaken, the Hunter Smoke melee will apply it along with any smoke clouds, and that's just some default behavior. The heavy attack on Spectral Blades will debuff, and both types of tether can apply a stronger than 15% weaken. These are 2 of the 4 outliers. Mobius Quiver will apply a 30% debuff, and Deadfall Tether, that single shot tether, will apply a 35% debuff instead of the usual 15%. As for Titans, the Twilight Arsenal super can apply Weaken with the axes, which I don't think always happened. I don't know, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think those axes applied Weaken when this super was released, but someone can correct me. The other way that Titans can apply Weaken is through Ward of Dawn, surprisingly, and it applies Weaken whenever you cast the bubble. Anything nearby when you activate your super will be weakened. As for Warlocks, Nova Warp will apply weakening whenever you perform the super-based Blink ability, and the Aspect Child of the Old Gods creates a Void Buddy that applies Weaken whenever it damages an enemy. So there are a few ways to apply Weaken across all 3 classes using the Void subclass. There's also 2 weapon perks that can apply Weaken, Demoralize and Withering Gaze. Both of these roll on legendary weapons, primary, special, and heavy, and they can both apply Weaken, giving you another way to synergize with Void. Now taking a look at the exotic armor, we have Fellwinter's Helm, which applies a 30% debuff on melees or finishers. This is often used in a lot of speedruns because it's more than 15% and it's not tied to the subclass. Chromatic Fire creates a Weaken explosion whenever you get a kinetic weapon kill with a Void super equipped. Controverse Hold allows charged grenades to apply Weaken without Echo of Undermining. And Titans have the exotic Second Chance, which lets the Shield Throw melee ability apply Weaken. Now there's actually quite a few exotic weapons that can apply Weaken, and I'm honestly surprised at how many there are. Tractor Cannon applies a 30% Weaken, making it the 4th source of increased Weaken available to players. Buried Bloodline applies Weaken on hit whenever you have Devour. Praxic Blade can apply Weaken if you're running a Void super. Heart Shadow the exotic sword when using a heavy attack will apply Weaken. Slayer's Fang submunitions will apply Weaken. The Tessellation special attack will apply Weaken. 3rd iteration's charge attack will apply Weaken. And Deterministic Chaos can also apply Weaken. It's supposed to be every 16th shot, but that wasn't actually happening. So there's a ton. And I'm obligated to mention that Collective Obligation will also apply Weaken. I'm sorry. And one last piece of tricky info is that Divinity does not apply a Void Weaken, so it can't benefit from subclass synergies like Stylish Executioner. Damn, there are a lot of things that can weaken in this game, but with that out of the way, we have our last debuff to cover, which is Suppression. This debuff is pretty simple, but has a few things going on. It's very similar to Arc Blind. Enemies become disoriented when suppressed, and they can't use abilities. This applies mainly to things like Hive Guardians, which have an active ability, but it also applies to Overload champions. Whenever you suppress an Overload, they immediately stun. But just like with Blind, you must reapply the suppression effect to stun them again. Having the debuff is not enough to stun them. If you suppress Guardians, you can take them out of their super and cancel their Transcendence, but this also applies to you inside of PvE. If you get suppressed by Tormentors or some bosses, say bye-bye to your abilities. It's not a fun experience to lose everything just after you've popped your super, so it's worthwhile learning which enemies can apply suppress and to keep your distance whenever you're against them. There's only 3 ways to suppress with the Void subclass because of how strong it is. Either by using a suppressor grenade, using shield bash on Titan, or a tether on Hunter. And there are no exotic armor pieces that apply suppression. Bombardiers can be misleading because its description uses the word suppress, but this isn't accurate, and it's actually just disorient, not void suppress. Exotic weapons, on the other hand, give us a couple of options. Collective Obligation is obvious. Tractor Cannon applies suppress on top of its weaken effect. Wave Splitter actually applies suppression when dealing sustained damage at high stacks, which can only be achieved after picking up an Orb of Power. Black Talon at some point in time gained the ability to suppress on heavy attack, no idea when that happened. And the second rocket in Two-Tailed Fox applies suppress as well. So there are quite a few options for suppression, but they are very niche and specific. And with those 6 verbs, you have most of the Void subclass covered, but we're still not done, because we also have the Void Breaches to go over. Void Breaches are very similar to Fire Sprites. You can't generate them for your teammates, they give a massive amount of energy to your class ability, and there's no intrinsic way to generate them via the subclass. You have to build into the creation of Void Breaches, but luckily there are quite a few fragments to help with build crafting. Echo of Cessation lets you generate a Void Breach when defeating volatile enemies. Echo of Domineering creates Void Breaches whenever you defeat suppressed enemies, and Echo of Harvest creates them whenever you defeat weakened enemies. So there's a fragment for each debuff, making it easy to build into at the same time as any of the other debuffs. And there's only one piece of armor that lets you create Void Breaches, and that's Second Chance for Titans. Whenever you get a kill with the shield throw, it will generate a Void Breach. And something really nice about this exotic is there is no cooldown on the Void Breach generation. This exotic also allows Void Breaches to give a decent chunk of melee energy whenever you pick one up, on top of the class ability regen that Void Breaches just do. So it's interactions like this that you need to pay attention to when you're build crafting. So I hope you understand the Void subclass just a little bit better now. I know it was a pretty lengthy one, but that's just how versatile Void is. If you take this knowledge and come up with your own build, let me know in the comments, or come join the Discord and let me know there. I'd love to test out your builds, because just playing with other people's creations is so much fun, and you'll think of something that I never could. So if you're still watching to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a wonderful rest of your day.